The Russian propaganda machine is an essential part of Putin's strategy to win in Ukraine, but different audiences get radically different messages. And when we take a look at how Russia is spinning their war to different people, we see just how fraudulent the whole thing is. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the thing I wanted to talk about first and foremost is actually this statement from a former Russian lieutenant colonel who is raising the red flag about how Russia is treating its own troops. He said he's never seen Russian conscripts treated this badly in the history of the Russian army. Now, this is someone who served in the Soviet army in Afghanistan during the 1980s. Now, he is a noted Putin critic, but this is not somebody who is some kind of, rabble-rousing 24-year-old, right? This is a seasoned Russian officer, and before that was a seasoned Soviet officer. And the treatment of Russian conscripts in Afghanistan was also notably brutal. But this is on another level entirely, right? Famously, Afghanistan and Chechnya, two conflicts where Russian conscripts were also pretty badly treated. But what he said, I thought was really interesting about, again, the reality on the ground. He said that Russia has basically seen two of its armies completely destroyed, right? And that the casualty count was at least 10 times higher than Afghanistan, which over a 10-year war, the Soviets lost 15,000 troops. And that was seen as so egregious that they actually collapsed the entire Soviet government. That's how unpopular that was. Right now, Ukraine's general staff saying 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. I don't think that's true, but I think 150,000 casualties is in line with Western estimates, including some leaked U.S. Estimates that were classified. So again, usually if they're classified, it means it's not they're not trying to spin anything. And that's been in just 26 months of fighting. But what I thought was also very interesting, he sort of buries the lead here in his interview. He says that he's in contact with now officers serving in some units, including a repair unit located just behind the front lines. They told him they were praying not to be sent into the trenches. He said, quote, "There's a completely different attitude towards frontline soldiers." He says a soldier on the front line stays there for a week to 10 days. No one cares about these people. No one protects them. He said it's a bestial attitude towards them, even from junior commanders, that he's never seen this attitude towards soldiers in any war in Russia's history. And to me, this aligns with the reality that we've seen. Russian conscripts, he's referring, I think, frontline units to primarily Storm Z or Storm V units. These are Russia's small assault groups who conduct the actual dirty business of charging enemy positions. Oftentimes, these are soldiers with just a few days of training, and they conduct what are essentially one-way assaults. I can't use the actual word, but one-way assaults with very little tactical sophistication, almost like a human wave type of attack. And we actually saw it earlier today on combatvetnews.com. This is my premium site. I twice a week find the viral combat footage that's coming at us from the front lines, and I do a deep dive analysis of it. It's totally uncensored, but it's for members only because I get so few sponsors on this channel, and I'm demonetized by YouTube so frequently that I depend on you guys. So if you got the ability to support me, I would really appreciate it. Any one of these tiers will get you access to all of those videos. Again, they drop twice a week. But if you want to help out with the lieutenant tier or the colonel tier, I shout you out at the end of videos, and you get an additional exclusive room on the Discord. So it's certainly some helpful stuff. Check us out, combatvetnews.com. But what we looked at on the video was a Russian assault of a Ukrainian trench, and it was so tactically unsophisticated. These frontline troops were so poorly supported that it looked like the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. You just saw the APC open up. You saw these troops trying to leave, but then you watched literally the APC that was supposed to provide them cover fire just drive off. It's it's things that in the U.S. military we would consider like truly abhorrent, to leave your infantry unsupported, to force them to fight without any kind of fire support. But seems just typical for the Russian military at this point, where they just have this belief that, yeah, they drop off this squad and maybe they all get eliminated, but the next squad might have better luck, and they just go back and pick up another squad and drop them off until, I guess, the Ukrainians run out of ammo. It's an absurd way to fight, right? So Russia, though, has to push back somehow against these kind of videos, right, that show a ill-prepared, poorly run Russian army. And what I want to point out is that they have one set of standards that leak into the Western media and another that leak into the Russian state media. So as you can see, this is, I think, a story coming to us from Russia. Well, rather, it is a very Russian framing story. I believe probably has intentionally or unintentionally filtered its way to this UK news outlet from Russian sources. And it says, the world holds its breath as Russia prepares for use of nuclear weapons capable of striking the UK, right? Very panic-inducing. But here's the thing. The literal subline explains it's just the latest threat the Kremlin has made towards nations that have been supporting Ukraine with military aid since February 2022. So 2.5 years, Russia's been doing what's called nuclear saber rattling. And it's been doing that for about Ukraine. But honestly, I would say at least twice a year for the past maybe 40 or 50 years. Putin or Russia has made statements about the power and potency of its nuclear weapons and says things that are generically true, right? Like it's testing, quote, the use of nuclear weapons in response to threats from the West. Notice how hard they've massaged the Russian official statements, right? Quote, the only two quotes from Russia is the words use of nuclear weapons and another quote that just says threats, end quote. Now, here's the thing. The U.S. military also tests the use of its nuclear weapons because we have a large nuclear arsenal and it's important to make sure it works. Do you really want nuclear weapons where you're not sure if they're going to function the way they're supposed to, right? Even if you have no intention or immediate plans of using them, you want to make sure they're at least safe and operational and in storage and don't need like maintenance. And of course, a nuclear arsenal exists to respond to threats, right? And you notice that there's no specifics about this. We know that the U.S., for example, considered terrorists within Afghanistan to be a threat, but it wasn't going to nuke them because the threat is always responded to proportionately, right? And you see, again, the article throwing in a bunch of biasing words like chilling warning, that's literally their goal. And this is part of it. Their goal is to chill Western response, chill Western support for Ukraine, because Russia wants to create the fiction that even continuing to pursue current policy is dangerous for the West and puts the West in imminent danger. Now, we should ignore, or Putin wants us to ignore the fact that for the past 4 or 5 months, Russia has had all the initiative on the battlefield. So why would the sudden provision, why would now he need to threaten the West? It's not like he's backed into a corner, far from it. He believes he's never been closer to victory. And the actual statement from their ministry says the first stage of the exercise is practical testing and preparation for the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons in the Southern Military District, right? This is personnel of missile formations are practicing combat training tasks, obtaining special ammunition for the Iskander, equipping launch vehicles, and then advancing them to their position and launching. This is what's just called a launch exercise. Very normal stuff, something that is a routine scheduled occurrence in the U.S. military for our Minuteman system. The only thing that makes it unique is that the United States, we don't, at least publicly, have non-strategic nuclear weapons. Those are what are called tactical nuclear weapons. They're generally smaller in yield and shorter in distance. But again, non-strategic, it also refers to the kind of targets you would need, you would target with that kind of yield. So again, somebody with even a pretty lay understanding of nuclear weapons understand that this is not a threat against, this is not bombs that will go to London. Non-strategic nuclear weapons would be ones that, for example, would be used to stop if there was a tank column marching to Moscow. Non-strategic nuclear weapons would likely be used on that in order to eliminate that tank column, right? They don't have the big enough yield to, say, hit London, right? So this is the kind of story that Russia wants to project to the West. Strength and a little bit of chaotic, a little bit of like a chaotic nature to Russia. They want you to believe that Putin is inscrutable, that he behaves in ways that no one can understand, and that he is ready to strike the US or UK at any time. And he wants voters to think, oh no, is the fact that we're sending mortar rounds to Ukrainians going to cause Putin to launch a nuclear strike? No, because the US has made clear that a nuclear strike against any NATO country would immediately trigger a full response from the United States. So is this war in Ukraine something that Putin has not even implemented a full draft on? Is it so important he's willing to turn Moscow into a parking lot? Because that is 100% what will happen. As discussed, the U.S. military does not pull punches on its readiness for its strategic nuclear weapons. And we don't have a nuclear escalatory ladder, right? We have only strategic weapons. So if you detonate a nuke on NATO territory, the only U.S. response in our book is to hit every major city and every major military installation in the entirety of Russia. But that's just one audience that's getting this Russian propaganda. The other audience is Russia itself. And for that, I rely on the state TV talking heads, old Russian dudes rant. This is like your drunk uncle, and he's almost certainly indeed sloshed on vodka, but Putin gave him a TV show. So in this, he kind of goes mask off, right? It's Soloviev scorning Blinken. This is White House, I think he's the national security advisor, for playing in the, quote, Russian city of Kiev. He then thinks that Helsinki and Warsaw are also historically Russian cities. So what he's doing is spinning, and we're going to mute it because he speaks in Russian and there's good subtitles, but you can just see the kind of the real brilliance here, right? He says they're talking about Blinken stating that U.S. weapons are not allowed to hit Russian territory. So Russia, again, has to spin to its people the fact that NATO, who it claims to be fighting, has all these constraints around use of its weapons. But again, NATO aggression is a core part of their messaging internal to their population. So right now, this is damage control. And the damage control is really interesting because he says, well, actually, it's all our Russian Kiev. He's like, it's actually all Russian territory. We own Kiev. So technically, you are using weapons in Russia because we've declared ourselves the owner of basically all of Eastern Europe. We'll present him with a rent charge for singing all kinds of nonsense in our Russian city, which is also interesting, right? You notice how that more than the threat of NATO, Russian internal propaganda seems to really orient itself, again, around the Putin-Ruski Mir experiment. The idea that there is a greater Russia, more than just the territory of the current Russian Federation, but that Russia has the right to dominate other countries and other peoples, even if they speak other languages, like Kiev and Ukrainian. Or as we'll see, he goes, that's new, our Russian city of Kiev. He even his co-host, right, who boy, talk about a high risk job. Try being a Putin propagandist in a debate show. Okay. You have to make sure that you offer some kind of pushback, but you can't actually raise core points like, what if we just left Ukraine, and do you think NATO would continue to like bomb us? Probably not. So you have to come up with these weird things. He's like, oh, what do you mean? Kiev, Russian? He's like, Kiev is the mother of Russian cities. Take the old lady back to her motherland. You can see he refers to the Ukrainians with a slur, comparing them to right-wing Germans. He says, it was just Odessa. Now it's also Kiev. And Lviv. So you notice how Russia does this thing in its internal propaganda where they're reframing debates, right? And they set the parameters of the debate. And that's to ensure that the public gets the illusion of policymaking without the actual core assumptions being questioned. Again, a great one of my, and Russia is notorious to it. Lots of governments do this. In the best example that I always cite is the 2008 presidential election in the United States, right? Between Obama and Bush, Obama and McCain, there was no anti-war candidate. You could vote for two different pro-war candidates, which was not, so there was no actual debate happening about the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. But a similar technique is being employed here, where instead of asking core questions, do Ukrainians want to be a part of Russia? Is this right of us to annex these other countries? They've reframed it over how many cities outside of Russia is Russia entitled to? Right. And so he's saying here, of course, oh yeah, Warsaw, Lviv, Helsinki, they're all Russian. They're kind of being tongue in cheek here. But he goes, historically, it's all true. At one point, all of them were dominated by Moscow. And again, he may not be incorrect, but by that argument, everyone is Roman. Right, everyone from basically the southern UK all the way to Algeria, they're all Roman. We should all be subject to Italian rule, because at one point, every one of those countries was dominated by Rome. So, again, I look at this, and I hope you guys take away from the fact that there's all this different messaging. There's a lot of propaganda that's being pushed that says different things to different audiences, and the goal is to manipulate you, right? We're all subject to it, but just ask yourself when you see a story, is this whole thing true, or is it being pushed by someone with an agenda, right? Anyway, that's all I had, guys. Thank you so much to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Thanks so much to our Lieutenant tier members. I appreciate you guys. I hope you check out the video from today, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.